All right, everybody. I hope everybody enjoyed their lunch. We're going to get the afternoon's program in session here. I get the privilege to introduce the next lady who's introducing our next speaker. I get to kind of call her a friend. She's in our region. She's an amazing mentor. I'm going to build her up a little bit. I have to. I kind of have to. I owe her that. John Ann Shear is a certified wildlife biologist. She has served as a state coordinator for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Partners for Fish and Wildlife program in North Carolina since 1999. Prior to that position, she worked for a 9-year period with various national wildlife refuges, and she currently spends most of her time with her passions of restoration and management work focused on longleaf pine and prescribed fire.
Good afternoon. I have the pleasure to introduce you today to Jesse Wimberley, a landowner and a partner in conservation. And I can tell you that his story is entertaining and inspiring. His work has made a positive difference to the land and, more importantly, to landowners. But let me first set the stage for you. So Jesse and I are both North Carolinians whose families came from Scotland, England, and Ireland before the Revolutionary War. We both grew up in a place called the Sandhills, and today we work in this landscape with conservation partnerships. North Carolina is known to many for its beaches of the Outer Banks and the Blue Ridge Mountains, but in between is the North Carolina Sandhills. This is a place where the early explorer William Bartram noted in 1780 was a vast plain forested with long-leafed pines. And it was covered, he noted, with grasses and an infinite variety of herbaceous plants. Indeed, it is thought that the longleaf pine ecosystem is second only to tropical rainforest in terms of vegetative diversity. Longleaf pine, a fire-adapted ecosystem, is a place that people believed held healing powers. And by the late 1800s, many people came from the north to rest and recover from their ailments. People still come. They come for that reason today in droves, and they come to play golf. The Sandhills is known for its golf courses, hosting several U.S. Open tournaments. And here you see the longleaf pine and our native wiregrass among our well-known Pinehurst Resort. So here's the combination. It's also home to the Fort Bragg Military Reservation, the largest military base in the world. It's home to the airborne and to special operations with 68,000 military and civilian employees. It has 163,000 acres, most of which is fire-maintained longleaf pine dedicated to training our troops. And guess what? It's also home to an endangered bird called the red-cockaded woodpecker. It is a complicated and long story of conflict and seemingly unsurmountable challenges between a bird and military readiness in the 1970s and 80s. It has led today to a recovered population of red-cockaded woodpeckers, a satisfied and well-trained army, a model conservation partnership, and the first safe harbor program in the country. The first to sign up for Safe Harbor was Pinehurst Resort. Heck, just a couple years ago, the local baseball team named themselves the Woodpeckers. In this map, the large blob on the right is Fort Bragg, and the smaller green blob on the left is another military property, and the orange is state protected game lands. So the dots are all the known red-cockaded woodpecker clusters. There are two distinct populations of woodpeckers, and the Fish and Wildlife Service goal has been to connect those two populations between the space in between we call the gap. In this map, the woodpeckers are not shown, but you can see the pink private lands that are in voluntary safe harbor program. There's a lot of private lands in and around, and they are essential to our habitat success. And it turns out that the way you manage longleaf pine for timber aligns with what the woodpeckers need. The private landowners here have a relatively small ownership. So instead of working with like 5 landowners that have 2,000 acres each, we have 500 landowners that have 20 to 50 acres. So there are some exceptions, but the expression about the back 40 is true for us in North Carolina. The pink parcels on this map that have slashes across them are Partners for Fish and Wildlife projects. So we've been very fortunate to work with dozens of landowners in the Sandhills to restore longleaf pine, including Jesse Wimberley. Jesse is a 4th generation landowner and burner from Moore County, North Carolina. And for the past 35 years, he's been engaged in restoring his family's 1970s home and his longleaf forest land. Part of his restoration efforts include bringing together neighbors and the local community in returning fire to the landscape. And as a result, Jesse has engaged hundreds of people in the use of prescribed fire. His latest project focuses on 6 Sandhills counties in which he helps landowners accomplish their management goals. And at the core of this project is the development of the North Carolina Sandhills Prescribed Burn Association. We call them PBAs. It helps landowners overcome barriers, gain self-sufficiency in the management of their longleaf pine, and particularly with the use of prescribed fire. It's neighbor helping neighbor. Welcome, Jesse.
You know, I really enjoyed yesterday meeting those landowners. As a landowner myself, I really appreciate that. Get that. As John Ann said, you know, I'm a 4th generation landowner, and I can't tell you what the weight of that means to me. And I could see it in the faces of some of the folks we met yesterday. When you have that lineage given to you and it's up to you to carry it to the next generation, it really means a lot. So it was very powerful yesterday meeting all those folks. Like I said, I'm 4th generation. We've been there since 1870. We were originally turpentiners, and if you don't know what turpentine is, that's a whole nother discussion, but really is what founded this country is the longleaf pine, and the turpentine industry is really what started this. But when we went from turpentine into free range cattle, and I really enjoyed meeting the cattle farmers yesterday. They operate on a little bit larger scale than we did, but we engaged in free range cattle. That's before you had to pay extra for free range. When you go to the grocery store and you see that free range, all cattle used to be free range. Then we went into tobacco, which is really where the family made our most economic gains with tobacco. In the southeast of this country, that's really where the economy was tobacco. But today, I grow water. Now that is probably something you go, what do you mean you're growing water? But conservation easements are a big part of my work, and I have one on my land, and I sold the development rights on all the wetlands on my farm, which resulted in the largest proceeds that I've ever experienced from my land. But the reason I could sell those, it is the watershed for all those golf courses. When all those folks come down from up north and they pay $100 for lunch and they drink a glass of water, that water is coming off my farm. And I'm very proud to be able to provide that water. Now, we went through a lot of different changes over that 150 years, but here was one thing that was common throughout the entire process, and that was fire. We burned when the turpentine stands to keep those open. Free range cattle, that's all we did every spring was burn the woods to green it up for the cattle. And then the tobacco, we burned around our tobacco fields to make sure they did not get burned up in a wildfire. And of course, today, that's part of what I do. You know, James this morning kind of teed us up for what I want to say, because I remember asking my mom, I said, Mom, how did you get all this work done on the farm? how did you burn 200 acres a year with such a small group of folks? And she looked at me kind of with a puzzled look like, what do you mean? I said, well, how'd you get all this work? How'd you hire the labor? She said, we didn't hire anybody. We helped each other out. We would go from farm to farm, doing whatever needed to be done, put in a barn of tobacco, and then we'd have, dinner at night together and sometimes even a dance. So that really stuck with me, neighbor helping neighbor. So I said, boy, that's something I ought to look into. By the way, this structure that you see there is very important to me. I actually live in that structure. Oftentimes people say, isn't that nice? You preserved the old cabin. I said, no. I live in that cabin. And every day I get to walk on the floorboards that, generations, my mom was born in that house. My grandfather was born in that house. I actually, and sorry to all the women who have actually delivered children, I helped with the delivery of both of my children in that house. So it really means a lot. So when I speak to landowners and I say, land means a lot to me and the history of my family means a lot to me, I'm very serious about that. So I started inviting, mom's advice, invite your neighbors over. I started inviting neighbors over to help me burn when I moved back there. And by the way, I think I must say I'm a reluctant landowner because I was actually living on the West Coast, having a good time up in Seattle. And my mom called me up and she said, your sisters aren't interested in the farm. If you don't want it, we're going to sell it. So I bought an old pickup truck in Seattle and drove back to North Carolina and pulled up at that house about 35 years ago. My first time we pulled up on that land was in a covered wagon. Then I pulled up in an 81 Chevy. So a little bit of advancement. But I started inviting neighbors over to help me burn. And this is a typical scene on our farm. Then one day, NC State, which is, our ag university, heard about this burning down there and said, listen, they came down, wanted to take some photos. And I said, that's fine. And afterwards, after the burn, one of the employees there at the university said, that thing you're doing there where you're inviting your neighbors over and helping you burn, that's called a prescribed burn association. I said, oh, it's great. Glad to have some language. He said they're real big out in the Midwest, Oklahoma, Nebraska, here in Arkansas. I said, that's great. That's great. And she said, there's also funding. I'm like, what? Yeah, you can get paid to do this. So I got some friends together that knew more about grant writing than I did. We wrote a grant to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and we're off and running. My notes here. So in 2016, we held our first rollout meeting for the PBA. And we actually brought in John Weir from Oklahoma State University, who stood up more PBAs than probably any other person. And he flew all the way out to North Carolina. We invited a bunch of landowners and John helped us think through how to do it. And today we're working with over 400 landowners just in that short period of time. That's how quick this thing is caught on. Now, what I want to do right now is take a look at how we went from a handful of landowners coming together to working with 400. The first step we had to do was understand who is the private landowner in the Sandhills of North Carolina. It's men, it's women, it's young people, and as you can see me there on the front row, not so young. We had to figure out now if we're going to try to engage all these folks, how are we going to do it? What is going to be the process that we move those landowners from interest to action? That building you see in the background there, that's our tobacco barn. The first thing we had to understand, most of the landowners that we work with have off-farm jobs. They have full-time jobs somewhere else. So anything we're going to be doing in the forest restoration is going to be done after work and on weekends. That became very important to us in developing that process to move those landowners from interest to action. And we knew real quick, if we were going to have any events, anything we were going to be doing, we had to make sure the scheduling met with the schedule of those landowners. The first thing that we realized and was very quick to understand that the most important tool, and my family had used it firsthand, the most important tool to restoring longleaf is prescribed fire. As you can see, let me get my glasses on so I can read. There's a whole list of benefits from, having prescribed fire, from reducing fuels is the big one, but it improves habitat, reduces ticks and chiggers. I didn't get any chiggers yesterday on that trip. Do y'all have chiggers in Arkansas? Okay, I didn't get a one. Okay, that's great. Glad to know that we wouldn't have taken that field trip in the Sandhills of North Carolina. There'd be some people in here complaining right now about scratching. So that was good. So we had to figure out, all right, here's all the great things that you can get from it. But so the first thing we did is we surveyed 200 landowners and we asked them, are you interested in fire? We got an 80% of the landowners that we surveyed said, yes, we're interested in using fire, but only 20% of them were using fire. So we said, all right, tell us the barriers. Why aren't you using fire? And you can see the list there. Always the number one reason people don't use fire is liability, but there's a whole host of other things that folks have in common. Lack of training and guidance, lack of experience, capacity to burn, limited equipment, pushback from the local community about fire. There's still some hesitancy. So we said, well, let's see what we can figure out here. So what we realized pretty quick, that we could take number 2, lack of training and experience, and number 4, capacity to burn people, and we could take 2 barriers and turn them into a solution. So that's what we did. We created a process to move those landowners from interest to actions by taking the barriers that they had given to us and turning them into our process. What we quickly learned, that process is actually cumulative. Someone doesn't immediately say, you don't say, here's the funding, go out and burn. They have to learn how to do that process, and it's an accumulative process. There are many different points of contact with that landowner and engagement with that landowner that leads them to be an independent practitioner of fire. The second thing is that process must be understandable and it must be doable. One of the stops, we were out there yesterday, I heard the landowner say there were so many things to streamside restoration, we just couldn't understand most of them. So, we trusted the folks who came out and helped us. Now, my goal is to teach folks to use fire. I want them to be independent practitioners of fire. So that process must be something that they're willing to pick up and carry out on their own. So every step of the way, we had to make sure what we were doing was understandable and achievable by that landowner. And remember, they have a full-time job. So when we did any trainings at night. The next piece that I think is very important to talk about is putting the landowner at the center of that process. So if you'll look, it would be to your left there, you see the 3 parts of moving that landowner from interest to action: education, training, and mentoring. That one on the far left there, education. We started having these small group meetings around our landscape that we were working in. And we would invite 25 to 30 landowners. We would put them in the middle of the space. If we were working in this space, the landowners would all be right here. Then I would invite all the agencies who had helped me with my restoration. Everybody from Fish and Wildlife to Nature Conservancy to our Forest Service, just a whole host of agencies. And they would all be around the exterior of the room. And this may seem a bit of effort on my part, but what I wanted to do was to model what I thought would be the key to success in this process. And that is the landowner must be the center of this process, and all the agencies must be there to assist them in that process. So normally the way it would work, we'd invite 25 or 30 landowners into the room. I would give an overview of my own personal journey and why growing longleaf and why prescribed fire was a reasonable thing to be engaged with. Because as you can imagine, that's not always the case. A lot of people are very hesitant to using fire. What we called this was speed dating. And it was a very interesting process because here's the thing to remember about those landowners. They're kind of on a spectrum. You have some folks who've never seen a pine tree, don't know what it is. And then you have some folks like me who've been engaged for 4 generations. So how to create a process where you're engaging that suite of landowners on a different part of that process became very informative and a challenge. So what we'd do is I'd go over and have a little have a little conversation with folks. And then I would ask each agency in the room, tell me what you can provide to us as landowners. And each group would say, I write management plans. I have cost share. I have training, all of it. And then that landowner could, after that short presentation, could go and meet with the agency who could meet them where they were in their process, and then be able to leave that meeting with an immediate next step. Because that's what we quickly learned. If we're going to keep the attention of these landowners who are very busy with full lives, we must have something that engages them in a way, again, understandable and doable. So that was the key to that. But landowners being at the center of that process. Now, I want to take you back to, I will give you an example of how that worked out. And I want to take you back to that map that John Ann showed, where you have the DOT on one side, the big green block, and another one. And that little place in the middle is called the gap. That is the most important piece of real estate to the Department of Defense in this country. Very simply, that little blob on the left is where our drone program is housed. The big blob on the right is, as she said, Fort Bragg, where they do all that training. So they need to be able to move back and forth, not over shopping malls and housing developments, but over farmland. So we engaged with one of the families there, hand-me-down farm, started working with those folks. They came to that speed dating meeting. And let me tell you a little bit about that, how they came to that meeting. When Dad passed away, they had a 100-acre farm, had 3 daughters. And so Mom was getting up in age. She said, let's just go ahead and divide the farm up. She equally divided that land among her 3 daughters, which is so typical in the Southeast. This is exactly what happened in my family. My mom was going to divide up the land between myself and my 2 sisters. They said, you can have it if you'll look after it. So that's what we did. Very typical process. So they had divided that land up and gone about their ways. They'd been a tobacco farm, for about 100 years. And that was it. It was going to be over. They came to one of our speed dating meetings. The next day, we had someone out there writing them a management plan, getting them signed up for cost share. They put all that farm back together. They named it Hand-Me-Down Farm, put it into an LLC. We actually even had somebody there who does estate planning to help them figure out how to do that. And today we have 3 generations on this farm. And you can see 2 of them right there. There's mom, one woman there and her daughter, but actually her mom, Cynthia's mom, is not in that photo, but she was there too. She's in her 80s. She was just sitting in a chair. So when we started burning out there, we had 3 generations of this family, all women, burning on their ancestral lands. And let me tell you, that is what we're about. That's who owns the landscape in this country, especially in the Southeast. And that's who we need to work with to put that landscape back. Now, it was great out there working. As you can see, we don't go into a lot of PPE. We don't wear a lot of protective gear. This family said, no, we don't need to wear all that. We know how to put the wood fire in the woods. What was amazing to me is to hear Mom, who's in her 80s, and like I said, you meet anybody in their 80s in the Sandhills, they've used fire at some point. It was gone, but somebody had used fire. She said, y'all sure are making a big fuss, because we did a lot of training with them, and we have a protocol that we follow before we light up. And we were out there burning. Mom said, y'all sure are making a big fuss about fire. We used to just take a lighter knot and set the woods on fire and go back to the house. That's great. That's the same way I asked my mom. It's the same thing. She said, that's what, we'd grab a lighter knot. If you don't know what that is, you talk to me afterwards. That is the key to making this thing successful today. If we're going to bump this thing up to the scale that we need to, it will require a protocol that can help that landowner know that there's safety involved, there's expertise involved. So that's been the key to our project, is developing that process that moves that landowner in a way they can understand it and it makes sense to them. So today, this farm, they're off and rolling. They're so excited about working back together. The three sisters now had gone their separate ways. Now they're out burning together. And it's just a wonderful thing to see that fire not only heals the landscape, but can heal a family. It brought this family back together. So I'm very excited about it. And by the way, if you don't know what that stump is right there, that little lighter, that's called a lighter stump. And that tree there in that photo, that's their great grandfather or grandfather had tapped that tree for turpentine, and it has the marks on it. These are cultural icons. You know, if you live south of the Savannah River in the eastern part of the United States, you have gopher turtles. And if you don't know anything about gopher turtles, check them out. They're wonderful. What we've learned is those dens that they dig are the hibernacula for just 30 to 40 species of animals. They're key to that system. We don't have those where I live, but what we do is we have those lighter stumps, and now we understand those lighter stumps serve as hibernacula for all kind of reptiles, amphibians, all kind of other animals live at the base of those trees, because it's a dead tree and there's some decay around the base of it. That becomes as refuge. So very important to maintain those. Here's one more example that I want to give you that is what I would say is our greatest challenge. Most of the folks engaged in the PBA and a lot of our work, it does not include a lot of underserved communities. And to me, that's our greatest frontier that we need to work in. So I want to tell you about a little piece of work that we've got going on in a neighboring county. It's called the Hope Community Forest. It's in Hope County. Hope County is a majority county, 1/3 Indian, 1/3 Black, 1/3 white. And they happen to have what is thought to be the only community-owned forest in the Southeast. They have a tract of land, 500 acres, owned by the citizens of Hope County. So when I heard about this, I went down and got on the agenda for the county commissioners. And I said, listen, that 530 acres that you have over there, would you be interested in restoring that? And I remember it was like it was yesterday. The county commissioners were all sitting up there, and you know, their job is to raise money for all schools and make sure everything works. So the first question they asked me was, Jesse, how much is that going to cost us? I went, oh my goodness, this is our work. I said, no. It's not going to cost you. It's actually going to generate income for you. And we were able to go in, as you can see that the photo up on the top right, that's after we went in and did a thinning. By the way, this was an old IP land, international paper. So it was a loblolly stand, tight stand, even age, which is no good for habitat. Great if you're just growing trees, not good for habitat. So we went in and did a thinning on that and handed that county a check for $250,000 right off the bat. And that was like the breakthrough from them when they realized, wait a minute, this land isn't going to cost us, but it can be part of our, revenue stream. I realized what a great opportunity we have. So we've been working with this folks. Like I said, we just did the initial thinning. We've started putting fire back into that landscape, and we will hold our first tree planting on December 3rd. to put longleaf back in, and we'll be bringing a lot of young people out. But most importantly, and this is what I said to the county commissioners, Hope County, like many of our counties, is a tier 3. And what that means is it's an underserved population, a very low wealth community. But most of the land, as you've heard several people today mention, the vast majority of land is privately held. And that little statement the county commissioners made, they had no idea that land could actually generate income. That is true for a lot of landowners. They have land, but they have no idea that it can be a revenue generator. So we're now using the Hope Community Forest as a place to bring other landowners out to show them that they can engage in forestry and it can be part of their economic portfolio, particular underserved communities, working with tribal lands and African-American communities. And this is our goal out there. As you can see, what we'll be doing, this is another site, but this is typically what we'll be doing. Those are loblollies over the top. We'll go in, start burning and underplant that with longleaf and restore that landscape. So we're very excited about the potential to make that happen. In closing, let me just say, the key to this, and what I did learn from my mom, is the key to success is neighbor helping neighbor. We like to educate our landowners on the environmental, cultural, and economic significance of longleaf restoration. Connecting the landowners and resources like you're doing here today, and the opportunities to create self-sufficiency. And we try to make at the base of all our work is people learning to work with each other, neighbor helping neighbor. I want to tell you who you're seeing in that photo. On the far left is a returning vet, just came back and when the shot was taken from Afghanistan. Using fire, getting back on the land was part of his healing process. In the middle, you see a young man who came out to learn to use fire because he wants it as a career. He wasn't sure, didn't want to go to college. So we said, come out, we'll teach you to use fire and then you can be a contract burner and do this for a living. On the far right is a professor from A&T University, which is a historic Black university. He is working exclusively with minority landowners to put fire back. So in that one burn, we were able to bring together 3 really different reasons for using fire, but all of them leading towards where we need to be, where we see, and we've heard it many times today, our natural resources should be the basis of our economy and the basis of our cultural connection. And I hope that's what we can keep doing. And let me tell you, the potential for PBAs to deliver resources that so much of these agencies in this room have is a wonderful opportunity. So if you're not engaged with one, please find a PBA next to you and start working with them because it's just a wonderful opportunity. Anyway, thank you. There's my contact. Questions? Do we have time for questions, John? Oh, absolutely. You know, John Ann was saying, mentioned that when I go out and talk to a landowner, I'm saying this is what I did. And let me tell you, that's a positive message. And right before I came here, I had a group of landowners coming out to my farm who I just met recently, and I wanted to show them. This is where you're headed after 30 years. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But every time I meet with a landowner, I said, this is what I did. And that really does have a powerful effect, is to be able to tell somebody, this is what I've tried. It worked for me. Any questions? Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because that really was probably the biggest challenge that we had, and really the reason none of the agencies in the Sandhills, when a landowner would say, can I get funding for burning? Yeah, you could get the funding. Who will show me how to put that funding on the ground? There was no place for a landowner to go and actually work hand in hand, get the mentoring they needed to get that fire done. So that's what the PBA was done. So the challenge with that, and the reason they couldn't do that was liability. So we figured out, well, the best way to handle that is, and in North Carolina, if you're burning 50 acres or less, all you need is a burn permit, which you can get in 3 minutes, on your computer from the North Carolina Forest Service. And the way it works, if you light that fire, it's yours. The liability is yours. So the landowner lighting that fire assumes all liability. So I could invite other landowners and say to that landowner, we'll be here to help you, but you have to assume that liability. That was a little bit of a challenge, but after they saw that we could get it done, I think most folks said that not burning was a greater liability than burning. But really, we're very blessed in North Carolina. We have simple negligence. Florida has gross negligence, which North Carolina is getting ready to try for. And what that means is, if you show that you put in your fire breaks, you had some of your neighbors come over to help you, you check the weather, that mitigates the liability. We can't get rid of the risk of burning, but we can mitigate that liability by having that protocol, by having that process. So that was the real challenge that we had to face. But so far, we do about 40 or 50 burns a year, and we've been doing it for 5 years. And we haven't lost one yet, and just to carry that on a little bit, I'm working with a lot of other PBAs. We have 4 more now in North Carolina, and there's probably a half a dozen across the Southeast now that all have come out of the Sandhills PBA. And they're always asking me, now we got a new problem. We've got so much interest. How do we stack up these burns? So we now, some days when we get the right burn window, we will have 4, sometimes 5 burns happening at the same time. That is when it gets nervous from a liability standpoint. But it's a good problem to have. We have so much interest in burning. There are multiple burns happening at the same time, all happening because that landowner has now become self-sufficient and fire themselves. Yes. We cover 6 counties, and they're fairly large counties. So if you had to drive from one side of our work area to the other, it could be an hour and a half. So a substantial geographical area. Yeah. By selling the timber off them, we did a thinning. Yeah, and it was a 50-year-old stand. They didn't even know they had it. I didn't mention this. The county commissioners didn't even realize they owned that piece of land. They didn't know. They didn't have any idea. So yeah, we went in and did a thinning, brought in a forester and did a commercial thinning on it to get it ready for the underplanting. And just by thinning it, it generated $250,000. And the reason I bring that up, y'all, is so many people are sitting on land and they just don't realize that it could actually be part of their, portfolio funding. So. Give me more. Oh, so I've worked with a land trust a good bit. And when I proposed to the land trust, they should be involved with this, they said, we don't quite understand. And I said, it's very simple. And the same thing that happened for me. When you go out there and you start putting sweat equity into your land and you spend a lot of time on that land, anytime you put a lot of time into something, you want to protect that investment. So our first grant that we wrote, we're on our 4th cycle now, we were able to protect 50 acres. That's what we could come up with. We had one landowner who wanted to protect. Our last cycle, we were able to protect 1,200 acres. And that's because landowners now, after about 5 years of putting in that sweat equity, they want to make sure all that time they put into that land is protected. And the best way to do that is through a conservation easement. So, as y'all know, we had the 30-30 plan that came out of the Biden White House, where by 2030, we want to protect 30%. This is one of the best mechanisms to do that. Find those landowners who are out there putting that sweat equity into your land and give them the opportunity to protect that investment is the best opportunity we have to make that 30-30 plan. Anyway. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesse. Hopefully our PBAs in Arkansas can stand up to the ones in North Carolina. So introducing the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance from Montana, I had this awesome bio that got sent to me, and Greg looked at me earlier and he said, don't use that, just say something really short about me. And so I'm going to expand a little bit on what Chief Cynthia Martinez said this morning when she said going about the wrong Fayetteville. This man's the most dedicated person in this room to get to this meeting, considering he went to 2 Fayettevilles to get here and spent the night in North Carolina thinking he was in Arkansas. So without further ado, I give you Greg Nugent.
Wow, what an honor. I was going to say it's great to be here, and in a lot of ways it is, but yeah, what a trip. What a great showing. Great event. Thank you for hosting. So I'm the state coordinator for the Partners for Fish and Wildlife program in Montana, and I live in western Montana, the Blackfoot Valley. But what a lot of you that know me don't know is when I moved to Montana in 1989, I moved to Malta, Montana from Minnesota. I think I was 1 when I moved there, right? 1989. Malta is this great prairie community in the heart of the Northern Great Plains. It's also home to the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance, which is a great community-based group that is really stewarding the grasslands and bringing landowners and partners together to do great things for conservation. And the Partners Program has been lucky enough to work with RSA since their beginning. And you all are going to get to hear from them here today about their successes and what they're doing. And so I get the honor of introducing the executive director, Angel Devreis, who joined RSA in 2020. Angel holds a master's degree in professional accounting and operates a family ranch with her husband and 3 kids. Also representing RSA is board member Rick Caquelin, and Rick is he's got a range degree out of Montana State University. He recently retired from NRCS as 33 years. He's also a landowner and is very active in conservation and very active with RSA. And so please give a hand to Angel and Rick and the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance.
This is a little bit.
Testing.
This is a little bit that I like to call good partner, bad partner. I'll let you decide which one of us is which. Are you going to start?
Yeah, I can start. Thank you guys so much for coming today. Thank you to the Partnerscapes for inviting us. This has been a really delightful experience, and visiting with so many of you. The best part of it is learning from all the conversations that we've had this past few days. Just really enjoyed it. I've never been to Arkansas. This is a beautiful state. I mean, I think Montana's beautiful, but this has its own set of beauties. So I just really appreciate being here. I'll introduce myself. Like Greg said, I'm an accountant, and I feel, is there anyone else that's an accountant in this room? That's what I thought. Okay, so so I obviously my job is a lot of finance work and grant administration. That's some of my background. When I got out of college and went into public accounting, I obviously did some tax work, but I did some federal grant auditing. That was kind of my job on the audit team, compliance auditing, and that's kind of how I landed with the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance. We solicit a lot of grants, and we'll talk about that more. But I have 3 kids. My husband is a beef cattle rancher. We operate a cow-calf operation and a little bit of commercial bull sales just east of Malta. So the Ranchers Stewardship Alliance is near and dear to my heart because we really bring in the best of all three of these worlds, the ranching, conservation, and our rural community world. So I'm just really honored to be here, and that's just a little bit about me.
Yes, thank you all for having us. My name is Rick. I am a board member on RSA. You heard a little bit about my history. You should know a little bit about Montana. I learned something last night at a TED Talk. Ted's in here somewhere. I call that was a TED Talk. And I learned how to tell the difference between Montana and Arkansas. Anybody know how to tell? In Montana, you can buy a tag to hunt an elk. You cannot buy a tag to hunt an alligator. And I'm very happy about that. After NRCS spent a long time taking good care of me, I now am on my own running cows until I run out of money or it quits raining completely. RSA asked me to sit on their board a couple of years ago, and they're a group like you. Have you guys seen the movie or read the book, Same Kind of Different as Me? Anybody know what that is? If you don't, you should look it up, because you guys are the same kind of different as RSA, and it's kind of cool to be in the room with everybody. And when they called and asked, I wanted to be that kind of different too. So
thanks, Rick. I just want to preface our talk today that we're going to say the word ranchers a lot, but truly we're talking about any sort of egg producers. Many farmers in our area also run cattle because they'll do cover crop grazing, things like that. So we're not just exclusive to livestock producers. It's just kind of any agricultural producer we're trying to support in our local area. So just wanted to preface that so there's not any preconceived ideas with that. Is there any? There we
another
go. Okay.
preconceived idea not to have is we don't represent the average size of Montanans. It is not that the podium is that large.
We're not really sure why they sent the two shortest people on the team, but they did.
I tried to get Mr. Stone to put a smaller podium up here this afternoon, and he said no.
Yes. So this is the RSA team. The top two rows are our board members. Looks like Tyrell's covered, but he's a young producer. And then the bottom four are our staff members. And truly, without this team, we couldn't do what we do. And this is just a small subset of the partnerships that we also have beyond that. There are so many government agencies and other NGOs that are part of the success of RSA. We cannot do this alone. And then you add on top of it all of our private landowners, and they are also very near and dear to our hearts. So I'm going to start by sharing a couple statements that we kind of stand by. We're going to go through our purpose, our vision, and our mission here real quickly. So the purpose of the Rancher Stewardship Alliance is we exist to help multi-generational and beginning ranchers to build collaborative, trusting relationships and community-based solutions we need to create our healthy working landscapes and our vibrant rural communities. And our vision for RSA is we believe in a future where ranching and rural communities are so successful in the Northern Great Plains that ranch families never need to consider selling or transferring their land out of production agriculture. Opportunities are abundant for new agriculturalists, and we have preserved the integrity of our working land so that people, economies, wildlife, and our natural landscapes may flourish in the Northern Great Plains. So when we take those two statements, we come up with our mission statement, which is a nice little tagline as well. Ranching, conservation, and community is a winning team. This is at the heart of every discussion we have. Every time we're approached with something that we are asked to do or should do or get involved with, we ask ourselves, is it benefiting these three groups and these three statements that we stand by? And so we just really hold this close to our plan and our strategy and how we're serving our mission.
One of the things I talked to a couple of the longstanding members of the board, and I asked them what things they would have us leave you with. And so we'll start with the end. They wanted you to know that originally what they provided was a safe place for a conversation. They tried hard, we try hard not to advocate a position. Provide a safe space, don't advocate a position. Don't focus on problems. We all have problems. Focus on solutions. And that's kind of been the mantra in their operating procedure for 17 years.
So the RSA group started in 2003. 30 ranch families came together to address some of the social issues that were being pushed on local ranching families. As they started building collaborative solutions, they started connecting more and more with other NGO organizations and other government agencies, and they just kind of built this relationship-based organization. And we're going to get into the programs that we do that kind of impact our mission as we go forward. Do you have anything to add? So we accomplish our mission through two major programs at this current time. Our education program and our conservation cost share project program. So our education program is deeply rooted in obviously educating both the landowner and rancher side, and also educating our friends and partners in government agencies or other organizations as well. So we like to think of ourselves as bridging that gap between the landowners and these organizations and agencies, and being a neutral party in the middle, being able to share and hear from each of those organizations about what challenges everyone's facing, and come up with collaborative solutions that further our mission, create healthy landscapes. So what you see here is our webinar series. We utilize this webinar series. We've done it for 2 years now. This is kind of a repetitive thing that we're trying to do. It happens January through April. We do one webinar a month, and we focus on topics very wide ranging, anything from like the rangeland analysis platform to ranching finances, to soil health, to virtual fencing, to, I'm trying to remember, to nutrition, to grazing management options. So we record those and we post them on our YouTube channel, because we hope that with a webinar, we can impact more than just our local counties in Montana. And then B, we just hope that they have a greater impact, and just to be able to share that knowledge and that content creation beyond our geographical space. So we've got this is happening again in 2023. So if you're interested in hopping in on any of those, they're free. We utilize funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to put on these educational events. So that's the webinar side. We also do in-person events. This was a soil health tour that we did with Nicole Masters in 2021. She did a 5-stop tour across Montana, and that was 221 participants there across those 5 stops, and it was really, really impactful.
I think it's worth letting everybody know. It's a pretty diverse group that helps develop our education program. We use all of our partners that will call in for a committee meeting to help us decide what we're going to do. I guess, are you going to talk about book club?
Mm-hmm.
So kind of a 3-pronged approach so far, and tell everybody it's not just Montana. Who have we been reaching out to?
Yeah, so our webinar, thankfully, because it's virtual, and when we first started this, we were kind of still in the COVID world, so we needed a way to impact people. We had event attendees from Germany and Sweden and Australia and Canada. It wasn't just in the United States. And then of course it was across all the United States. So those webinars have been a great opportunity to collaborate and work with and hear from other people in other parts of the United States and also around the world. Another unique thing about our webinars, I'm going to back up a little bit, is that we ask each of our speakers to generate what we call a breakout question. And so what we do using the Zoom platform is we put all of the participants in small, like 7 to 8 groups, and you like send them out, you like zoom them out into like the Zoom space, and you are broken down into smaller groups. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. Okay, I'm seeing some heads nod. And so then we get an opportunity where smaller groups and people can share their individual experiences and answer the questions and have a more unique discussion. And we do that for every webinar we do. And then we come back into the larger group and people share, they use the chat, obviously, and then our webinar instructor will facilitate the discussion there. That's another unique thing that we've been doing with our webinars, just as a way to connect more people together and learn from one another. Some other in-person events, we did last fall what we call the Grazers Gathering. We had 3 speakers. We hosted it as a TED Talk style event. And each of the 3 speakers talked about different grazing management tools that they use, such as multi-species grazing, such as winter grazing. And do you remember what the third one, what do Kimmels do? Or Cooper Hibbard? Sorry, it's not off of the top of my head, but anyways, we had these 3 speakers talk. When we announced this, we were capped at 50 people to come to this just because we're in Malta, Montana, and there's not a lot of space for a lot of people. And it sold out in 2 weeks, and it was a full house. And since then, we've been asked if this is coming back multiple times. And so we're trying to work that into our 2023 educational event. But this was so valuable because the ranchers in the room got to hear from other ranchers. Right, it's that peer-to-peer learning, and it was a great event. It was a huge success, and we continue to hear about how much people enjoyed it and how other groups are trying to replicate that as well. And then just last week, or actually this one was in March, we did farm succession planning. So when we talk a lot about making sure that egg land stays in egg hands, and that they never have to transition their land out of egg production. A big part of that comes because of people not having succession plans, right? They haven't made plans in place. They haven't talked about it. It's uncomfortable. And this is a Lane phrase. She's from Canada. She calls herself the farm family coach. And she does succession planning, but we're not talking your nuts and bolts. We're not talking getting your lawyer or your accountant in the room. She's talking about social, emotional, and conflict resolution. And the stories she has to tell about her coaching clients are astounding and heartbreaking. So that was huge. We did they were single day workshops, one in Malta and one in Glasgow, which is just 70 miles east of us. They were a full day. Malta was over 60 people in attendance and Glasgow was over 35. So for us, that was huge. And we followed this up with one of her books and we did a book club. We're going to talk about book club a little bit more too, but we did a book club. It was just a 2-session virtual, just like your webinars. And it was a small group, but it was very vulnerable. There was a lot of trust built in there because people were sharing family issues about succession planning. And my brother doesn't want to get along and he thinks he has the farm, but he's never stepped foot on it. And just all of those relationships are built so deeply in those small groups. And it's really amazing.
Don't you just want to go to a group meeting and talk about your feelings? Wouldn't it be great? We do that once in a while.
We do. So then we kind of followed that up with farm, ranch, finances, and economics. Is anyone familiar with Dallas Mount and the Ranch Management Consultant Group or the Ranching for Profit School? Right, because you're all biologists and ecologists. Okay, got it. So he's well known in the ranching community for his Ranching for Profit School. It's a 7-day school where he teaches you all about how to analyze and analyze your ranch finances, figure out where you're most profitable, understanding your overheads, understanding gross margin. So his school, if you want to go to it, it costs $2,750 for a week. It is a huge investment, but no doubt most people come away with that by saving themselves anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000 to $20,000 after they leave his school. So thank you to our grant funders because we're able to bring speakers with the caliber like Dallas Mount to our local community. And this event had 80 people in the room, which is a really big event for Malta, Montana. And it was 80 people eager to learn, eager to listen. And he took he took what he teaches in his 7-day school and threw it into a 2-day workshop for us. And that was incredibly successful. And the people that you meet there is truly amazing. I guess I didn't have a slide for book club, but what we've started doing is virtual book clubs, and we've got one open right now. We just opened registration for the David Montgomery book, The Hidden Half of Nature, if any of you are familiar with that book. We just use the book club to share ideas and thoughts and think more critically about what we're doing in this world. And those have been very successful. We give, again, thanks to our grant funding, we give the first 20 books away or 20 registrations away, a book for free. And we meet virtually. It's usually 2 to 3 sessions once a month for 2 to 3 months. And so far we've been 100% to bring the author in and also speak. We've done 3 book clubs previous to this. We did, what's Nicole Masters' book? So it's a soil health book. I'm sorry, I can't remember. So we did her book, and then she came and spoke at it, obviously virtually, right? And then we did Fred Provenz's Nourishment book, and then he came and spoke at it with our book club participants. And then we did Elaine Frase's event, Elaine Frase's book after her event, and she came and she sat down actually both of those virtual book clubs and shared with her experiences and knowledge, and that's so valuable to our book club participants. So next up we have The Hidden Half of Nature with David Montgomery. That's going to be a November and a January and a February event. So if any of you are welcome or interested, I'd like to welcome you to that. That would be really good.
Come up to one of us and give us your email and we'll get you on the list and get you signed up. Book club is pretty good time.
So next we're going to talk about our conservation program. It's a cost share program, like many of you may be familiar with. We utilize funding from a lot of different collaborative partners. These are a lot of them. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is a major one, and obviously the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. They are 2 major funders of this cost share program that we do with landowners. We also utilize other partners to do these projects. Those are pretty much all listed, the ones that have a financial interest in our conservation cost share program. I suppose okay, so yeah, the Conservation Committee got started. It kind of grew organically as RSA's rancher group started connecting and linking with these other agencies and NGOs. It just continued to work, and this collaborative partnership was just being built organically. And then what happened was we got our first grant in 2017, and that's when the Conservation Committee was officially formed. So the Conservation Committee, it consists of around 30 different partners and ranchers and representatives from government agencies, and we meet monthly. And at these monthly meetings, we present on the ground projects, landowner projects. That it's anonymous, we don't know their name, but we talk about who the rancher is, not their name, but like, are they young? Are they a young and beginning rancher? We have a ranking system. We talk about what projects they want to do, what conservation issues and challenges they're facing. And at that table is all the other partners at Conservation Committee. And many of them are sitting at the table trying to come up with solutions for this landowner. Or maybe they have funding that falls under a certain map layer where that landowner property is. And they pitch in and they have an investment in these landowners to make it more sustainable and long-term viable and all of that. So our Conservation Committee is unique, is what we're hearing, that this is not necessarily something that takes place all around. But it's a really important and vital part of what RSA is doing.
The committee is unique because the projects don't come to our board unless the committee approves them. And the committee is an incredible, ridiculous number of people, some of whom even you in the audience would say, what are those guys doing on that committee? I thought they were against us, not with us, right? And it has to come through Conservation Committee before it ever gets to the board. And we don't just not use their names in order to protect that there isn't any bias. Our field man, Martin, he makes up names for you all. So the projects have names, just not names that anyone could discern the actual person from.
Yeah, exactly. So since Rick introduced him, Martin Townsend is our conservation committee or our conservation program coordinator. That's kind of what we call him. He's got a different title. He is employed by Pheasants Forever. So just another really great example of the partnerships that RSA has been able to create. So his employment is with Pheasants Forever specifically to spend our conservation program grant money. That's his job. I also utilize him because I am an accountant and I need a translator when we're talking in the wildlife biology and rangeland ecology world. So he's been a great resource for me. I've learned so much from him over the last 2 years, and he's just been a really vital part of what RSA is doing. And he was part of Conservation Committee long before he was an employee with Pheasants Forever. He was working for the Sage Grouse Initiative under the Montana Association of Conservation Districts. So he worked out of the NRCS office in Malta. So he built a ton of relationships, trusting relationships with landowners in that office to start with. And so he's brought those trusting relationships to RSA, and he's built a really great network of people and landowners in Phillips County and beyond, because we also work in Blaine and Valley County, which are right next to us. So when the Conservation Committee got their first grant in 2017, it was primarily focused on CRP land and the conversion of that from CRP to grasslands. So that grant prioritized taking expiring CRP land and reseeding it into native grasses or making it available for grazing, right? Because if it was CRP land, it was usually lacking either forage for the livestock to graze, or it was lacking fencing infrastructure to be able to put cows in there, or it was lacking water infrastructure. So that first grant focused on those expiring CRP lands and making them usable and grazable for ranchers, as well as creating wildlife habitat for the wildlife in our area.
The nice thing about that program, and I've heard several different speakers talk about it, it was one of those win-win, no-brainer deals. The CRP ground that was coming out of contract wasn't suitable cropland. The landowners knew it, the agencies knew it, the wildlife groups knew it, we knew it. We just had to figure out a way to help it stay in permanent vegetation and still make it a viable part of those operations. And so it was one of those rare occasions where we took advantage of a situation that it was hard to lose at.
Right, and so when we finished meeting the metrics of that grant, we actually met metrics by 150%. It was a huge success. We impacted way more acres than we had committed to in that grant process, and that has just snowballed into more and more grant funding, specifically from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, as well as the Partners Program. We continue to work very hard at reaching landowners, using collaborative partners, and having a really positive impact on the lands in our area. So since then, we've secured 9 more grants from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, as well as we continue to get awarded additional money through our co-op agreement with the Partners Program. And then we've also received some funding from, we had a private donor give us $20,000 in a state just to help with a local rancher and the wildlife habitat. We have also received some money from the World Wildlife Fund for reseedings, obviously, again, to just continue to reseed to those native grasses and help the rancher, as well as help the wildlife habitat in our area. So I don't think our conservation efforts are going to be slowing down anytime soon. So since our very first grant, we've had some really great successes that we really like to celebrate with our partners and our landowners. The first being that we have spent over $2 million in conservation project money in our 3-county area, which is huge for small town Montana. Malta, Montana is about 2,000 people and our county is only 4,000. I've been comparing with some of you here in Arkansas. Arkansas has 3 million people and is 50,000 square miles. Montana has 1 million people and we are 150,000 square miles. So we are very much not populated. So to be able to bring and impact our local community and economy with $2 million is phenomenal, really. We utilize local vendors, fencing vendors, well drillers, pipe layers, seed stores, you name it. It's been a huge impact on our local economy. We've also been able to impact 130,000 acres, and that's directly on the projects themselves. That doesn't include the whole ranch impact maybe that we might have, right? So if we put in a water tank or laid pipe or put fencing around, it's been over 130,000 acres in the last 5 years. Some of the other funding that we also get, not only just like grassland habitat preservation, but also big game migration for pronghorn is a big one. That's that money also comes from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So what we've been able to do is replace a lot of fencing infrastructure, because I'm not sure if any of you are aware. Does anyone want to guess how much it may cost per mile to take out and replace a fence? A 4 or 5 strand barbed wire fence. Steel posts. You're really high. 15,000. That's about what it costs. 15,000 per mile, and it wasn't that long ago that it was around 7,000 or 8,000.
I meant, oops, you're just a little high.
Just a little high, but I mean it's not far off. So those kind of costs for the local rancher are beyond what they have ability to do. So with the pronghorn migration, we had wildlife biologists from the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks collar some pronghorn, and they showed us data, which for me and my financial brain was like, ooh, that's cool. You could see a female pronghorn where she was stopping and hitting a fence, and it was an old sheep wire fence, maybe from the 1930s. And you could see where she could not continue her migration pattern. So what we've been able to do is connect with landowners and help them take out and replace fence, and we replace it with wildlife friendly specs, right? So 18 inches high on your bottom wire and at least 12 inches, I believe, between your top 2 wires. And those projects wouldn't have been able to be done otherwise with the landowners. So with that, we have replaced 120 miles of fence, which is a lot of miles of fence, through Phillips, Blaine, and Valley counties. But most importantly, above it all, we've been able to work with 85 families. It's actually around 95 individual projects, but it's 85 families. There's a few projects that have kind of a phase 1 and phase 2. That's what we mostly care about, right? We care about the people. We care about working with them. We care about meeting their needs and identifying challenges from both the landowner perspective and our conservation and landscape perspective, and finding solutions where we can come together and do efforts like this.
And just so it's clear, the reason that Fish and Wildlife Service and NIFWIF and all these different places like us, while we're doing those things, we're helping the prairie dog, the sage grouse, the Sprig's pipit, the chestnut collared longspur, you know, and those are the ones I can name right now without thinking about it. And so it's really a hand in glove kind of situation. Everybody's able to improve viability and sustainability of ranches and the environment at the same time, as every speaker in here has said.
Yeah. So currently, we really don't anticipate either of our programs slowing down at this time. We see in our hearing from our funders and relationships that we've built that there's still more conservation money coming down, and there's still a lot of great interest in the Northern Great Plains where we're at, because it's one of the largest intact grasslands in North America, I believe. Again, I'm an accountant, so please someone correct me if I'm wrong. So there's still a lot of work to do. I've been asked the question, well, eventually, aren't you going to just finish all your projects? And sometimes I say, you know, in theory, you might think that, but I think there will continue to be conservation related issues and challenges and solutions that need to be met across our area and across the landscape that we're living in right now. I hope we can continue to help people like Jim and Dee Shuttle. By the way, that's Martin Townsend, the guy in the middle on the left, and he's on the right in the right picture. He's our conservation coordinator. He is fantastic at building these relationships, not only with our landowners, but also our government agencies and other NGOs. He really just thinks critically about what's best for them. He often talks to me about like, his concern for, you know, this water, we can put in a $50,000 water system on their land, and that sounds great, but if they have to pay half of it and they have to pay 25,000 and they only get another 100 AUMs, which is a grazing management, is that really worth it? So he thinks about this very critically before he ever brings a project to Conservation Committee, and he sits down with these landowners and asks them, you know, are you able to put in the in-kind labor, the in-kind match, or the cash match to do this project, and are you getting the full benefit out of it that you think you need to, as well as the benefit that comes for the land and the wildlife as well. So I don't want to discount what Martin does at all, because he spends a lot of time thinking very critically about, are we creating a win for the ranching community? Are we creating a win for the conservation community? And are we creating a win for our rural communities? So and before we kind of close, I want to tell one more story. One of the first things that we did, or one of the new things that we did this summer, was what we call the partner barbecue. And we really just invited a lot of our partners who have supported us, people who are on our conservation committee, people who volunteer on our other committees as well. And we asked them just to gather and just to say thank you. But what we did is we also gave our very first award. So Martin likes this joke. For whatever reason, or however he ended up with it, he ended up with a roll of gold stars. Gold star stickers, they're about an inch big, in his desk. And if you, post-COVID, if you came to one of our conservation committee meetings in person, you got a gold star. And this became like an issue of pride that you got a gold star. And this is Aaron Griffith. He came to one of our meetings, and he actually came to several of them in person, and he would put the gold stars on his water bottle. Then pretty soon he came to a meeting and all of his gold stars were gone. His wife had put the water bottle through the dishwasher and he lost all of his gold stars, and it was very depressing. But we continued to support him, and he continued to get more gold stars every time he came. And anytime someone, a partner maybe who lives in Missoula or in Bozeman, has come to an event, they always get a gold star, and it's just a fun joke that we have with Conservation Committee. But what also has come of it is we decided to honor a partner, and this is something I think we want to continue for their effort on that Conservation Committee. So not only was Aaron distraught that he lost his gold stars off of his water bottle, but he also brought a really important thing that we do at Conservation Committee now that we had never considered. And he said, I love what you guys are doing. I'll give you a background. He works for the U.S. Fish Wildlife Service, the Refuge program. He manages the Bowdoin Wildlife Refuge just east of Malta. And he moved here in January of 2021. But he would tell us, he's from North Carolina, so he's got a similar accent to many of you. And he said, man, I love what y'all are doing. But I just don't know how I can contribute. Like, I don't know how to bring a project here. I don't know. I don't really connect with a lot of, private landowners very much in my job. Like, how can I be a part of this? I would love to be able to just say that I heard from someone and here's what I know. And so he brought the idea of what we call now a spitball session. So we've implemented in our agenda what we call a spitball session, and it's just for any partner or any member there at that committee to say, here's what I know and here's some problems I'm hearing. What does the group know about? And that's become a really vital part of our agenda the last 6 months of utilizing that conversation and building the relationships and coming up with collaborative solutions. And I mean, we're not doing anything earth-shattering, but we're talking about challenges that our neighbors are facing and that our friends are facing, and we're trying to be a part of those solutions. And so Aaron Griffith got the Gold Star Award for the first year. And you can see it's a horseshoe with a gold star in the middle. And so that's just a really good testament of what that conservation committee is doing. RSA's future. Just a few weeks ago, we had a strategic planning session about what's RSA going to do in the future. And last week I texted Rick and I said, man, what am I going to share with these people about what RSA's future looks like? And he said, well, just be honest, tell them what's going on. We struggle to grow. There's a lot of work to do, but the capacity is hard. You know, obviously finding employees to do it and the time and effort to do it is a struggle, like most of you, all of you are all facing. But I'm not down about that. I think there are some bright ideas and futures involved with what RSA is doing. And when we sat in our strategic planning session and talked about different projects or ideas, and I was writing on these big sticky notes on the wall, and we were pushing them there and here, and here's the threats, and here's where we could add staff, and here's what we should do in 5 years and 10 years. Every time an idea was brought up, we spent some time getting clear about our mission, and every time an idea was brought up, we always went back to the word relationships. Every single thing we talked about went back to relationships. And now I can't get it out of my head. Even last week at the Dallas Mount event, where he's talking ranch finances and ranch economics and how to be profitable. At the end of the day, he said, it doesn't matter how great your balance sheet looks or how much money you're making. If you're not investing and valuing your people, your business is unsuccessful. And that just goes right to my heart, to be honest. So RSA's future is about the people. Obviously, that's going to come through some projects, some programs. We would really love to start a podcast like most people, but we believe that because of the relationships that we're building, not only with landowners and agencies and other organizations, that there's some really valuable information out there that also fall right into our education program. We would really love to build a building and have it be an educational center. We think that is really valuable for our community. We're going to explore that option. We talk a lot about a ranch and range mentorship program that includes some rangeland monitoring, because we're finding that's a huge need in our area. We would also like just a rancher to rancher mentorship program as well. Being able to support those young and beginning ranchers getting started, because you know, one of the biggest hurdles is access to land right now. The land prices are beyond what anyone with no assets could afford. And even if you're running a full-time successful business, it's not enough to make your land payment to the bank. It is a really, really big struggle. And so we're thinking really critically about how to support young and beginning ranchers.
So the future is kind of scary for us. There's a lot of people asking for things. There's a lot of opportunities out there. We have a really incredible staff of four. We're growing so fast. It sounds crazy, but the workload grows faster. So one caution to all of you is be mindful. RSA is incredibly lucky to have the 4 people we have. Most of you probably are aware how difficult it is to get good people or even get a people to work. I mean, in Montana, it is really difficult right now. And we don't just have people, we have great people. And we're trying to be careful not to bury them in new ideas and new work. And so that's the caution. The cool thing is, it's just like being here these last 2 days. Everyone is so positive and upbeat, and I would be willing to bet anyone a cup of coffee if we went to a coffee shop in a rural town within 100 miles of here in any direction, it would not be positive. the outlook in ag has not been great for a while, right? And so what I like about you and RSA and our group is you don't know that. It's a pretty positive thing, and that's the way we're going to approach it in the future. And I want to take 1 second to say thank you to our executive director. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have gotten an award had it not been for the staff. That's where it happens. And this as well, obviously. So thank you, Angel.
Does
Thank you.
anyone have questions? Yes, so her question, if you couldn't hear, was, are we competing on our grant money with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation? And yes, we are. We submit proposals anytime they put an RFP out. So if we don't submit a proposal, we're not considered. Our track record, though, does give us a lot of advantage, right? Because we've been able to successfully meet our metrics. We spend the money when we said we would. We have good systems in place. We have a great relationship with the people at NIFWF. And so, you know, I don't know what their ranking criteria looks like or how they actually pick us, but I do know that we've built a good relationship with them and we follow through in our commitments on our grants, very much so. Sure. Okay, so she's asking questions about how we choose and select the projects that get brought to Conservation Committee, which you're making this easy. I love systems. I'm an accountant. I love systems. So any one of our Conservation Committee members can bring a project. Now, there are a select few of people who are recurring project bringers, for lack of a better term, because they're the people out there talking to the landowners. So Martin is obviously one who brings a lot. We also have a woman by the name of Kelsey Malloy. She works for the Nature Conservancy. She's built a lot of great relationships with landowners in the area. And as she's talking to people and building these relationships, she's hearing what challenges they're facing. And so then she gets solution-based. She builds projects. So Marissa Sather, she works for the Partners Program out of Valley County. She also brings a lot of projects. So it's just if it comes up, right? Like if they think that they have talked to a landowner and they've found some challenges and want to, they bring a project and they build a proposal. They'll often ask Martin, you know, I've got this proposal, which funding pool do you think it should come out of? Yada, yada, yada. And we have a ranking criteria. If the project falls under some wildlife maps, wetland habitat, bird habitat, pronghorn migration, then they're going to qualify for different funding pools potentially. And then depending on what they need in their project, if they need fencing or water infrastructure, seeding, things like that, it's gonna fall. So a lot of those conversations are happening with Martin before a project ever gets presented at Conservation Committee. And then of course we have that ranking criteria as well. So we do prioritize young and beginning ranchers. We prioritize someone who's never done a project with us before, someone who has never even worked with an agency before. If they are open and willing, they get some priority, right? Because we want to build those relationships. Does that answer your question? Yeah. maybe yes and no to that. The conservation committee or the conservation project money is private landowners. So that is generally just like one person on their land or something. But when we talk about our commitment to the communities, it's kind of twofold. We're committed to, or it's more than twofold. We're committed to the ranching community. We're committed to the conservation and land health community. We're committed to our very local geographical community as well, and creating some economic impact on those communities. So to answer your question, I'll say yes, because we had the Montana Community Foundation came to us and said, we heard about the workshop you did with Elaine Fraze and farm succession, and we want you to consider also bringing in this workshop leader, right? So, and we have the Philco Economic Growth Council has come to us and said, hey, we're doing a video promotion about living and working in Phillips County. Can you come and be a part of our planning committee, right? So we're not necessarily sub-granting or giving money, but we're known for creating collaborative efforts, and other community groups who aren't necessarily conservation related are coming to us and asking us to be a part of what they're doing. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you very much, RSA, for being here and letting us hear about that. I have two announcements super quick before we go on break. The silent auction is over here, so please come look at it and sign up for something. And when you come back in for 3 o'clock, there's going to be a panel discussion on keeping prescribed fire as a management tool. There will be a phone number up on this screen. If you have a question, please feel free to text it to that number. It can be anonymous or whatever. We'll also take questions from the field or from the tables or whatever. But if you want to text it beforehand, please do so. And you're released till 3 o'clock. That was the toilet.
I just got a call from the tech guy, but he didn't leave a message.
I
So
know,
I didn't
I-
know what it was. Yeah, I know.
Where are you gonna be at, Baxter?
I'm gonna sit right there at that table. I get hands, I'll just walk up.
Okay.
Check 1, 2.
So right now, I may not hear it, but right now we have it some live so that when the panel is up there, we see everybody. When they're done, and go back to the. Would you like us to zoom back in on
Yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. Okay, here you go, Buck. What we say? Take a chair. I'm standing here. Yeah. Yeah, he was just gonna kind of shuttle him. Hour.